afternoon, and welcome to the Seminole Community Library. Today we have a special program, Alexander Hamilton's Legacy and Related Historic Sites, sponsored by the Friends of Seminole Library. But before we get to that, I wanted to remind you that 2 weeks from today, on February 23rd, the musicale will be the St. Petersburg Saxophone Quartet, so you don't want to miss that. And at the end of the program, if you want to stop by the tables by the door, you can pick up some flyers of some of our other upcoming programs. And at that time, if you would like to make a donation to help cover the cost of these programs, that would be appreciated too. And before you leave the building, don't forget to stop in the Friends Gift Shop, where we always have a sale going on. Right now, it's oversized paperbacks, buy one, get one free. So the Friends of the Library are pleased to present today's presenters, Mary Ann Hamilton and Rand Scholet. Mary Ann Hamilton, longtime resident of Seminole and widow of the descendant of one of our nation's founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton, will share highlights of her husband's life and recent visits to Revolutionary War sites and key locations that celebrate the establishment of the new nation, including those traveled by Major General Alexander Hamilton. Our second speaker, Rand Scholet, is a historical analyst covering the American Revolutionary and early constitutional period. He has been featured as a speaker on C-SPAN at national park sites, Society of Cincinnati, Daughters of the American Revolution, the Sons of the American Revolution, Colonial Dames of America, Museum of American Finance, Columbia University, Hamilton College, U.S. Coast Guard Academy, U.S. Naval Academy, and Society of the Mayflower Descendants, Washington's headquarters, and other historical societies and locations. He has contributed to articles in the New York Times, AP's Big Story, CNBC, Smithsonian Magazine, and the LA Times. Wow. A lot of accomplishments. Mr. Scholet applied his 25 years of analytical skills with IBM in unique ways in the field of history. He recently served for 8 years as president of the Alexander Hamilton Awareness Society. So please give a warm welcome to Mary Ann Hamilton and Rand Scholet.
Thank you, Karen, and the Friends group that makes these programs possible. And to Lori Tonti, if you could give a wave in the back, thank you so much for hosting and setting all this up. Ooh, what do you think about that? Happy 50th anniversary. This is a Seminole event. And also here with us today is the mayor of Seminole, Leslie Waters, who I got her book. This is a copy of her book, which is fascinating. Many people think that Alexander Hamilton only cared about big government at the federal level. It's not true. What books have come out recently have talked about concurrence. Hamilton worked to find that blend between the national government and state government. Then when he implemented his program through public administration, he went to the local level, and it's nice to talk at the big national level, but the hard work is at the local level. The church, the churches, the schools, the utilities, water, electricity, hard decisions, a lot of opinions, right, Mayor? A lot of opinions.
Okay. And also, I'd like to, our city manager is here, and Tony Deal.
Could you stand up, please?
In the red,
thank you. Welcome. What Mayor Waters does is not just work to improve your community. She's been all around the world helping other countries learn about how to set up democracies and to be effective at the local level. A current event, just a week and a half ago, is a local event, and so we wanted to add something new to this. And there's a memorial. If you go south on I-275, just through the toll booth, before you go over the bridge on the right is a beautiful memorial. And U.S. Coast Guard was a cutter. That's what they call their ships, are cutters. And unfortunately, well, the good news and why you're here is that Alexander Hamilton's the founder of the U.S. Coast Guard, among many other things. But the sad news is that on January 28th, 40 years ago, 23 Coast Guardsmen lost their lives in a freak accident. And Mary Ann mentioned that it was in the Seminole Beacon and it was on the front page of our Clearwater Beacon where I'm from. And what's really, so of the 50 shipmates that were on board, 23 lost their lives. This is the anchor from that ship. And there was an honored hero. Has anyone in this room, by show of hands, heard about the honoring a few weeks ago about Billy? Good, couple. Well, what's interesting is that there's a circle of heroes just 10 miles off from Clearwater Beach, 40 feet down, and they're sending all these heroes from the various veteran military branches 40 feet down in the water so people can come and dive down and see these. And right now, they have 12, and Billy is going to be the 13th, and they expect to have these heroes grow to be 24. Here's from my front, I just got it yesterday, so I just took an image of that, who used his belt and his strength to keep the hatch and the access open for others to get up, and then he lost his life in helping others. So that just happened recently. There were 9 survivors there for the ceremony, which was really nice. And let's see if I can do this here. This gentleman was on the cutter, and this, her brother was lost. She was sitting next to Mary Ann and I. The top, highest level person in all the U.S. Coast Guard is called the Commandant. And Commandant Carl Schultz was there, and you can see Mary Ann and I talking. That was a nice commitment for him to come down. He's been very, very busy. And the Secretary of Homeland Security was there. If anyone's been watching the news lately, there's been an awful lot of him. He's only 44 years old, but he's quite a rising star in getting things done. Chad Wolf, of course, I had to tease him a little bit because he's also responsible for voting effectiveness. And I said, you know, having the name Chad doesn't really, it's been a while since anyone mentioned it. So there he is between Mary Ann and I. We had a nice engaging conversation. Alexander Hamilton, by a show of hands, how many people's one of the top 2 or 3 favorites of your whole life was Alexander Hamilton 10 years ago? Raise your hand.
Yep.
Good. I wasn't either. My favorites were Jefferson, Washington, and Franklin. That's pretty much what we're taught and what we learn. And one of the last people that I studied was Alexander Hamilton because he was egotistical, overbearing, self-centered, a monarchist, only cared about rich people. So who wants to study him? Someone in finance area. So I was late to the game that I even heard about. In the last 2 weeks, just by a show of hands, how many has heard the name Alexander Hamilton in the news? Yeah, I was going to say an awful lot. Yes, for the presidential appeal. How many heard the Democrats use Alexander Hamilton for their defense of what they're doing? Raise your hands. Come on. Okay. How many heard the Republicans utilize Alexander Hamilton in their defense? That's what's interesting. When you think about it, 10 years ago, except for a couple of special people here, didn't know who Alexander Hamilton was, and now more and more, they're getting to understand the impact that he had and the wisdom he had. Our society, so it's the Alexander Hamilton Awareness Society, for short, is the AHA Society, for short. And that was 4 years before the musical, and we engaged with Lin-Manuel Miranda 2 years before it was on Broadway. So yes, you heard him in the news, and I'm going to share more later. So how many people have seen some recent announcements in the last 2 weeks about Alexander Hamilton? Good, I'll share those in the Q&A, so we can get into it. That's what people have told me in the last week. I want to hear what's Hamilton and impeachment and what's going on with the musical. So I've got some new stats as well as how effective they've been and some of the new places that the musical is going. What's really cool, we have 2 young people. Can you 2 young people raise your hand, please? They're the future. What's exciting about the Hamilton musical is there's a lot of people like us, we've already learned our stuff. We already made it through school, and we're pretty well formed in our opinions. But what the musical is doing is grabbing their attention such that they want to learn about our founding and the wisdom and the debates which are so similar to today. So the young people are going to help the next generation too with the new understanding of Hamilton's role. Okay, now we're going to move on to our first speaker, who's Mary Ann Hamilton. And she's going to share the adventure. This is the most youthful person I've ever met. Wait, no, we have a few more. She's so youthful, she's jumping up already. The adventure, she just had a birthday this past Tuesday, but she'll never tell you how old she is.
86.
86 years old. She is amazing. And these are the places that she and I have been. Hamilton places. So you have Charleston, Nevis, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, North Jersey, New York and New York City, Connecticut, and Annapolis, which she's going to share her travels with you in a moment, and it helps you give you an understanding, because what will be occurring, I mean, I was an IBMer, and I didn't know anything about history. If I could figure out that Hamilton had something to offer, then all of you will be learning more and more. So today's talk is to let you have that structure, that overall understanding of Hamilton. And so getting to see some of the places he was is interesting. And okay, here's Mary Ann Hamilton with?
Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah, anyone raise a hand? And then you go, where is this?
Philadelphia.
Philadelphia. What's this place called?
Independence Hall.
Almost.
Oh.
It's across the field from Constitution. It's the National Constitution Center. And this is really neat on the second floor. Some people have missed it. It's unbelievable. You missed Signers Hall? They have 42 life-size bronze statues. 39 approved the Constitution, 3 did not, and they're all there. So these are the Hamiltons together. So she is mentioned as the widow of Lawrence Morgan Hamilton. Listen how fascinating this is. Lawrence Morgan Hamilton. Let's take each one of his names. Lawrence, his first name. Who knows where that name is from?
John.
From John Lawrence, his best buddy during the Revolutionary War. His middle name, Morgan. He's a descendant of J.P. Morgan, Mary Ann's husband.
Oh.
The grandson. And you're going to see the home he built for her husband's mother. Wow, wait, do you see that? And then Hamilton. He's a descendant of Alexander Hamilton as well. The great-great-grandson of both Alexander and Elizabeth, or more formally known as Eliza. And a weird, interesting coincidence that Lawrence, who you may hear Mary Ann mention Laurie, he went by Laurie more than Lawrence, more formal. 150 years later, he served in the same New York State Assembly that the Alexander Hamilton had served in, the same body, 150 years earlier. And now we're getting to your slide. So here's Mary Ann, and a number of things you see around her she's going to speak on. So let's give the birthday girl a little welcome up to speak.
I'm telling you, give him the mic and I just have trouble getting it back. Good afternoon. And thanks to the Seminole Community Library and Friends Group for inviting me to speak today. And thank you all for attending. We have quite a group here today. And such a pretty day, I thought some people would use that as an excuse. Okay, in 2016, my neighbor, who's like a son to me, purchased tickets for us to go to New York City to see the new musical Hamilton. After a wonderful show, we were invited backstage to meet Lin-Manuel Miranda. I told Lin I tried to purchase his book before we came up, but the store didn't have it in. Lin said, it comes out tomorrow, April the 12th. Then he said, wait a minute, and he went to his dressing room and returned with a copy of his new book, The Revolution, and signed it to me. Almost 3 years ago, my friend Greg Plentadarum introduced me to Rand Scholet, founder and of the Alexander Hamilton Awareness Society, or as it is fondly known, the AHA Society, and it has been a whirlwind tour ever since. In June 2017, we went to Charleston, South Carolina. We visited the plantation where John Lawrence, Alexander Hamilton's best friend and my husband's namesake, lived and is buried along with his father, Henry Lawrence. This plantation is over 3,000 acres, and it was owned by Claire Booth Luce and her husband, Henry, in 1936. She was our nation's first female ambassador and served in the U.S. House of Representatives. The Booths gave the plantation to the monks in 1947, and it is now called Mepkin Abbey. If you think of a napkin, you may remember Mepkin. Rand and I arrived there at 5 p.m. on June the 18th. It was so beautiful and serene, with the sun coming through the trees, the manicured lawns, the beautiful wood-carved religious images. These were carved from the live oak trees that were blown down during the Hurricane Hugo in 1989. If you're ever in Charleston, you really should go visit it because it's free and it's just beautiful. The next day, we were invited on the Coast Guard cutter Hamilton for the change of the command ceremony. This cutter is the 6th cutter named after Alexander Hamilton. I went aboard the 5th cutter, number 715, in Washington, D.C. in 1967, when it was brand new. My husband was at the christening in New Orleans a couple of years earlier. When he died, he wanted his ashes scattered in the Caribbean Sea from the cutter Hamilton, so they could float back to Nevis and St. Croix, where Hamilton lived in his youth. My husband died February the 8th, 1978, 42 years ago yesterday. I had the funeral home called the Admiral of the Coast Guard. I think the funeral director thought I was crazy or a bereaved woman. Admiral Stoller called me back right away and said the Coast Guard cutter Hamilton would be in Jacksonville, Florida in the next month, and they would be honored to take Laurie's ashes out to sea. I met the cutter at Mayport, Florida, and gave the ashes to Captain Flanders. He said, "Mrs. Hamilton, we would love to have you accompany us on this voyage, but we're going to Guantanamo, and we don't have a way to get you back." I stayed in Florida. The next year, in 2018, was so busy for this old lady. I turned 86 last Tuesday. That January was my 7th visit to the island of Nevis, where Alexander Hamilton was born on January the 11th, 1757. On the wall around the site of his birthplace is a plaque my husband unveiled at the bicentennial of Alexander Hamilton's birth. My husband was appointed by President Dwight Eisenhower to be chairman of the Committee on the Birthplace and Boyhood Homes of Alexander Hamilton. My first visit to Nevis was February 1966, where my husband met Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. On January the 11th, we went to the Hamilton Museum for a call to New York City to sing Happy Birthday to a large group at Trinity Church. Rand Scholet, the Coast Guard Color Guard, Ambassador Hull of Nevis and St. Kitts, and many guests were at Hamilton's burial ground site. On Nevis, Premier Brantley sang along with us, then New York sang Happy Birthday back to us. I was in the tropicals and Rand was in cold New York. The next day on Nevis, they had their annual tea party for Alexander Hamilton's birthday. Scholarship awards were given out to 4 Nevis-born students. The fund pays for the secondary school, books, uniforms, and supplies. The Premier's wife, Sharon Bentley, sat next to me. She was so well-spoken, tall, and distinguished looking. I gave my speech and we had a group picture with the winners. On September 19th, 1983, The island of Nevis and St. Kitts received their independence from Great Britain, and on that day, the island dedicated the rebuilt birthplace of Alexander Hamilton. Cecily Tyson, the American actor, whose parents were born on Nevis, cut the ribbon to his restored birthplace and museum. On that day, I presented Nevis with silver candlesticks that had belonged to Alexander Hamilton, and they gave me a beautiful cowhide plaque with the date of their independence on it. It's on the back table if you wish to look later. After returning to my Timberwoods condominium in Seminole, I wanted to do more for Nevis. I had an original portrait of Alexander Hamilton with the Society of the Cincinnati Eagle on his chest. My husband had a copy of this portrait painted in 1960, and he gave the copy to the Society of the Cincinnati in Washington, D.C., my hometown. I'm sure many of you do not know about the Society of the Cincinnati. I didn't. I thought of Cincinnati, Ohio, but Ohio wasn't one of the original 13 states. After the last major battle of the American Revolution at Yorktown in 1781, it was another 2 years before the war was officially over. George Washington did not become president until 1789, another 6 years. He and his fellow officers wanted to form an organization so they could stay in touch, the Society of the Cincinnati. I decided to call the Society of Cincinnati's headquarters at the Anderson House in Washington, D.C., and I told them I would give them the original portrait of Alexander Hamilton if they would send the copy to the island of Nevis. They said they would be happy to do that. I also sent a number of first edition books and pictures to Nevis. In May 2018, I was invited with some of the members of the AHA Society to the Society of Cincinnati in Washington, D.C. The Society took the George Washington Diamond Eagle out of the vault and let us observe the front and the back of it. The eagle was made as a gift to the Society's first President General, George Washington, by the officers of the French Navy who had been admitted to the Society. The Washington Diamond Eagle has over 200 diamonds, a couple of rubies for its eyes, and some emeralds in it. It is priceless. Later that night, the Society honored me for donating to them 35 years earlier the original portrait of Alexander Hamilton. The next day, Rand and I visited the Smithsonian Institute and viewed the costume that Lin-Manuel Miranda wore in the play Hamilton. We had a VI tour of the Treasury building, which required Secret Service clearance. We met with Ambassador Hall and other dignitaries. The following day, we were off to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania to see the Historic District, Independence Hall with the Liberty Bell, Constitution Hall, Constitution Center, Hamilton's residence, City Tavern, where the Founding Fathers used to gather and strategize their meetings. The National Park Service opened the first bank of the United States for us to see. It was built in 1797 and has been closed for over 40 years. It is being restored and will soon be reopened to the public. Nearby, there was a 6-part Hamilton Was Here set of interacting exhibits. We stopped at Princeton Cemetery to visit Aaron Burr's grave and later went to the State House in Annapolis, Maryland, the first capital of the United States. We then ate some crab cakes. They were the best ones from anywhere. 2 months later, on July the 11th, I was at Weehawken, New Jersey, the day Aaron Burr shot Hamilton. The next day, July the 12th, Alexander Hamilton died, and we were at Trinity Church, where he's buried. There was a large crowd at the church, the Coast Guard Color Guard, the Colonial Fife and Drum Group, The guest speakers, including yours truly. What, am I going too fast?
No,
Oh, okay. On Saturday, July the 14th, we went to the Grange. There were tours, videos, and speakers. I was lucky to be one of the speakers. The Grange was Hamilton's last home, and the only home he ever owned and had built for his family, only 3 years before he died. This is the original home and location of the 3 sites where it has set. My husband took me to visit the Grange in January of 1966 at its second location, where it was sandwiched between 2 buildings on the campus of City University. No porches, no furniture, no admittance. The caretaker, Mr. Daniels, was thrilled to see my husband. He unlocked the house, took us inside, and showed us around. The Grange was moved around the corner to a 3rd location in 2008. It has been restored, furnished, new plantings outside, and it is open to the public. I love this picture of the children playing in the snow. I think of the time the same house looked down on Alexander Hamilton's children. The AHA Society has free events almost every month, and you should visit the Grange if you're in New York City. Rand Scholet made arrangements for me to see my husband's family home, Table Rock, in Tuxedo, New York. Lawrence was born on June the 18th, 1900. His grandfather, J.P. Morgan, had the mansion built for his daughter, Juliet Morgan Hamilton, my husband's mother. The 52-room home was finished in 1904. Juliet lived in it until she sold it to nuns in 1939. It was a girls' school for many years. It went on the market for sale a couple of weeks after we were there for $22 million. But it has been reduced to $19 million, if any of you are still interested. The St. Elizabeth Chapel was built nearby. It was named after my husband's younger sister, Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton, who died at the age of 11 from the flu in 1919. She is buried under the altar. Her mother, brother, Alexander Hamilton, and sister-in-law are buried in the chapel near the altar. There is a plaque on the wall of the chapel for my husband, Lawrence Morgan Hamilton, 1900 to 1978. I have a book that you can look at that has more pictures of Table Rock in the chapel that are on the table in the back. On October 12th, 2018, Rand and I were in New London, Connecticut at the Coast Guard Academy for the unveiling of the new statue of Alexander Hamilton. It was a beautiful fall morning. The sun came out just as they were unveiling the statue. Later that afternoon, about 1,200 cadets marched on the parade ground. I was so impressed. It was beautiful. Rand Scholet, some other AHA Society members, and I stayed nearby at the Huntington House. It was built in 1765, and I stayed in the bedroom where Lafayette had slept. I felt a few spirits around me in that house. Our host, Damien Krugo, said, "Alexander Hamilton never visited here." I told him, "Now you can say Mrs. Hamilton slept here." I also visited Cedar Hill Cemetery in Hartford, Connecticut, where J.P. Morgan and some of his family are buried. It is located right across from Katharine Hepburn's burial plot.